Cheers. Alright, boys and girls, today we're going to read the very last part of Ramona the Pest. If you like this book, you could buy it yourself. There's actually a whole series. So there's Ramona the Pest, the next one is called Ramona the Brave. There's a whole bunch of books if you want to keep reading by yourself this summer. When we left Ramona, she was a kindergarten dropout. She had gotten in trouble and had to go home from school, and she said she was not going back to kindergarten because her teacher did not like her anymore. And her mom said, "Oh, yes, you are." And she said, "No." So her sister got up and went to school, and Ramona stayed home. A terrible day had begun. No one said much at breakfast. Howie, who had recovered from being sick, stopped for Ramona on his way to school, and then went on without her. Ramona watched all the children in the neighborhood go to school, and when the street was quiet, she turned on the television. But her mother turned it off and said, "Little girls who don't go to school can't watch TV." Ramona felt that her mother did not understand. She wanted to go to school. She wanted to go to school more than anything in the world, but she could not go back when her teacher did not like her. Ramona got out her crayons and her paper, which someone had put away for her. Remember last night? She made a big mess. She threw her crayons and her papers on the floor, and she was so mad. Someone put them away for her, so she got them back out. And she settled down to draw. She drew a bird, a cat, and a ball in a row, and then with her red crayon she crossed out the cat because it did not start with the same sound as bird and ball. Afterwards, she covered a whole sheet of paper with cues, Ramona style, with ears and whiskers. Ramona's mother did not feel sorry for Ramona. She just said, "Get your sweater, Ramona. I have to drive down to the shopping center." Ramona wished she had a dime from the Tooth Fairy to spend. But there followed the most boring morning of Ramona's entire life. She trailed along after her mother in the shopping center while Mrs. Quimby bought socks for Beezus, some buttons and thread, pillowcases that were on sale, a new electric cord for the iron, a packet of paper for Ramona to draw on, and a pattern. Looking at patterns was the worst part. Here's Ramona and her mom at the shopping center. Do you like to go shopping with your mom or your dad? Or is it kind of boring? They're just looking at stuff and there's nothing for you to do? Ramona looks really bored. So her mom here is looking at patterns so that she could make clothes for herself. And Ramona's mother seemed to sit for hours looking at pictures of boring dresses. At the beginning of the shopping trip, Mrs. Quimby said, "Ramona, you mustn't put your hands on things in stores." Later, she said, "Ramona, please don't touch things." By the time they reached the pattern counter, she said, "Ramona, how many times do I have to tell you to keep your hands to yourself?" When Mrs. Quimby had finally picked out a pattern and they were leaving the store, who should they run into but Mrs. Whistler, a neighbor. "Oh, hello," said Mrs. Whistler, "and there's Ramona. I thought a big girl like you would be going to kindergarten." Ramona had nothing to say. "How old are you, dear?" asked Mrs. Whistler. Ramona still had nothing to say to Mrs. Whistler, but she did hold up 5 fingers for her to count. "5!" exclaimed Mrs. Whistler. "What's the matter, dear? Has the cat got your tongue?" Ramona stuck out her tongue, just enough to show Mrs. Whistler that the cat had not got it. Mrs. Whistler gasped. Ramona! Mrs. Quimby was thoroughly exasperated. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whistler. Ramona seems to have forgotten her manners. After this apology, she said angrily, Ramona Geraldine Quimby, don't ever let me catch you doing that again. You're not allowed to stick out your tongue at grown-ups. But Mama, said Ramona, as she was dragged toward the parking lot, she asked me and I was just showing. But there was no use in finishing that sentence, because Mrs. Quimby was not listening, and she probably would not have understood if she had listened. Mrs. Quimby and Ramona returned home in time to pass the morning kindergarten, straggling along the sidewalk with all of their seat work to show their mothers. Ramona got down on the floor of the car so they could not see her. Later that afternoon, Beezus brought Mary Jane home from school so they could play. How did you like kindergarten today? Said Mary Jane in a bright, false voice. It told Ramona too clearly that Mary Jane already knew she had not gone to kindergarten. Why don't you stop talking? Asked Ramona. I'll bet Henry Huggins isn't going to want to marry a girl who hasn't even finished kindergarten, said Mary Jane. Don't tease her, said Beezus, who might tease her sister herself, but was very quick to protect her from others. Ramona went outside and rode her two-wheeled, lopsided tricycle up and down the sidewalk for a while, before she sadly took off Miss Binny's red ribbon, which she had woven through the front wheel. Why is she taking out that red ribbon? Maybe she feels like she doesn't want to think about Miss Binny, or it makes her too sad to see it. On the second morning, Mrs. Quimby took a dress out of Ramona's closet without saying a word. Ramona spoke. I'm not going to school, she said. Ramona, aren't you ever going back to kindergarten? Mrs. Quimby asked wearily. Yes, said Ramona. Mrs. Quimby smiled. Good, let's make it today. Ramona reached for her play clothes. No, I'm going to stay away until Miss Binny forgets all about me, and then when I go back she'll think I'm someone else. Mrs. Quimby sighed and shook her head. Ramona, Miss Binny is not going to forget you. Yes, she will, insisted Ramona. She will if I stay away long enough. Why does she want Miss Binny to forget her? She loves Miss Binny. But she thinks Miss Binny doesn't love her anymore. So if Miss Binny forgets about her and she goes back and like a new person, then maybe Miss Binny will like her again. That's what she thinks. Some older children on the way to school shouted, "Drop out!" as they passed the Quimby's house. That day was a long, long day for Ramona. She drew some more seat work for herself, and afterward there was nothing to do but wander around the house, poking her tongue in the hole where her tooth was, while she kept her lips shut tight. Remember, she didn't tell her parents that she lost her tooth. Do you remember where her tooth is? It's still in Miss Binny's desk at school. But that evening, Ramona's father said, I miss my little girl's smiles. Ramona managed a tight-lipped smile that did not show her teeth. Later, she heard her father say something to her mother about this nonsense has gone on long enough. And her mother answered with something about Ramona has to make up her own mind she wants to behave herself. Ramona despaired. Nobody understood. She wanted to behave, except when she was banging her heels on the bedroom wall. She had always wanted to behave herself. Why couldn't people understand how she felt? She had only touched Susan's hair in the first place because it was so beautiful. And the last time, well, Susan had been so bossy, she deserved to have her hair pulled. Ramona soon discovered the other children in the neighborhood were fascinated by her predicament. "How come you get to stay out of school?" they asked. "Miss Benny doesn't want me," Ramona answered. "Did you have fun in kindergarten today?" Mary Jane would ask her every day, pretending she did not know Ramona had stayed home. Ramona was not fooled for a second, and she refused to answer. Henry Huggins was the one, quite unintentionally, without meaning to, who really frightened Ramona. One afternoon, while she was pedaling her lopsided two-wheeled tricycle up and down the front of her house, Henry came riding down the street, delivering the newspaper. He paused with one foot on the curb in front of the Quimby's house while he gave her the paper. "Hi," said Henry. "That's quite a trike you're riding." "This isn't a trike," Ramona said with dignity. "This is my two-wheeler." Henry grinned and threw the paper onto the Quimby's front steps. "How come the truant officer doesn't make you go to school?" he asked. "What's a truant officer?" asked Ramona. "A man who gets after kids who don't go to school," Henry answered carelessly, and biked away down the street. A truant officer? A truant officer, Ramona decided, must be something like the dog catcher, who sometimes came to the school when there were too many dogs running around. He would try and lasso the dogs, and once he did manage to catch an older, overweight basset hound. He shut the dog in the back of his truck and drove away with it. Ramona did not want any truant officer to catch her and drive away with her. So she put her lopsided two-wheeled tricycle into the garage and went into the house and stayed there, looking out from behind the curtains at the other children and poking her tongue into the space where her tooth used to be. "Ramona, why do you keep making those faces?" asked Mrs. Quimby in the tired voice she had been using for the last few days. Ramona took her tongue out of the space. "I'm not making faces," she said. Pretty soon her grown-up tooth would come in without the tooth fairy paying a visit, and no one would even know she had lost a tooth. She wondered what Miss Benny had done with her tooth. Thrown it away, most likely. Do you think Miss Benny would throw away Ramona's tooth? I hope not. The next morning, Ramona continued to draw rows of 3 pictures, circle 2 and cross out 1. But the morning was long and lonely. Ramona was so lonely, she even considered going back to kindergarten. But then she thought about Miss Benny, who did not like her anymore and might not be glad to see her. She decided she would have to wait much, much longer for Miss Benny to forget about her. "When do you think Miss Benny will forget me?" Ramona asked her mother. Mrs. Quimby kissed the top of Ramona's head. "I doubt if she will ever forget you. Not ever, as long as she lives." The situation was hopeless. That noon, Ramona was not at all hungry when she sat down to lunch on soup, a sandwich, and some carrot sticks. She bit into a carrot stick, but chewing it took a long time. She stopped chewing altogether when she heard the doorbell ring. Her heart began to thump. Maybe the truant officer had finally come to get her and carry her off in the back of his truck. Maybe she should run and hide. "Why, Howie!" Ramona heard her mother say. It had been a close call. Ramona went on chewing at her carrot stick. She was safe. It was only Howie. "Come in, Howie," said Mrs. Quimby. "Ramona is having her lunch. Would you like to stay for soup and a sandwich? I can call your mother and ask if it's all right." Ramona hoped Howie would stay. She was that lonely. I just brought Ramona a letter. Ramona jumped up from the table. A letter for me? Who's it from? Here was the first interesting thing that had happened in days. I don't know, said Howie. Miss Binny told me to give it to you. Ramona snatched the envelope from Howie, and sure enough there was Ramona printed on the envelope. Let me read it to you, said Mrs. Quimby. Can Ramona read yet? Not really. So how's she going to read the letter? But Ramona says, it's my letter. She tore open the envelope. When she pulled it out, two things caught her eye at once. Her tooth was scotch taped to the top of the paper, and the first line, which Ramona could read, because she knew how letters started. Dear Ramona Q, was followed by two lines of printing, which Ramona was not able to read. Look at that. Mama, cried Ramona, filled with joy. Miss Binny had not thrown away her tooth, and Miss Binny had drawn ears and whiskers on the Q. The teacher liked the way Ramona made her Q, so she must like Ramona too. There was hope after all. Why, Ramona! Mrs. Quimby was astonished. You lost a tooth. When did that happen? At school, said Ramona, and here it is. She waved the letter at her mother, and then she studied it carefully, because she wanted so much to be able to read Miss Binny's words herself. It says, Dear Ramona Q, here is your tooth. I hope the tooth fairy brings you $1. I miss you and want you to come back to kindergarten. Love and kisses, Miss Binny. Miss Quimby smiled and held out her hand. Why don't you let me read the letter? Ramona handed over the letter. Maybe the words did not say exactly what she had pretended to read, but she was sure they must mean the same. Dear Ramona Q, began Miss Quimby, and she said, why, she makes her Q the same way you do. Go on, Mamma, said Ramona, eager to hear what the letter really said. Mrs. Quimby read, I am sorry I forgot to give you your tooth, but I am sure the tooth fairy will understand. When are you coming back to kindergarten? Ramona did not care if the tooth fairy understood or not. Miss Binny understood, and nothing else mattered. Tomorrow, Mamma, she said, I'm going to kindergarten tomorrow. Good girl, said Mrs. Quimby, and hugged Ramona. She can't, said Howie, matter of fact. Tomorrow is Saturday. Ramona gave Howie a look, but then she said, please stay for lunch, Howie. It isn't tuna fish, it's peanut butter and jelly. And that's the end. So in the end, Miss Binny still loved Ramona, and she wanted her to come back to kindergarten. Look how happy Ramona is. She's gonna go back. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this story. It's one of my favorites. Like I said, if you like it, you could get it for yourself. It's also in Spanish, if you want to read it in Spanish. And there's a bunch more Ramona books if you want to find out what happens to her in first grade.